Good morning, everyone. I'm here to present with my colleague Stijn van Kessel this paper entitled Pushing Towards Exit, Euro-Rejection is a Populist Common Denominator, which, despite the fancy title, stems from a very simple intuition, and that is that the populist radical right has actually radicalized its anti-EU stance as a result of the either direct or indirect effects of the EU crisis. Why so? I'm going to try and see if this one works. Yeah, perfect. Why so? We've been basically focusing on the populist radical right both in Central Eastern Europe and Western Europe. And what we see is that in January 2012, Jobbik in Hungary, the populist radical right of Hungary, has been basically gathering thousands of people in the streets of Budapest. For the first time, gathering thousands of people on the anti-EU issue. And then in recent times, we've seen that Marine Le Pen and Geert Wilders has been trying to establish an anti-EU bloc at the European level. And more recently, for the basically 1 week ago, the secretary of the Lega Nord, Salvini, has been claiming that the EU and the Euro should be deemed as crimes against humanity. So, starting from this, what do we know about Euroscepticism? We know that Euroscepticism is basically an intrinsic predisposition of peripheral parties, meaning that if you're a fringe party, either of the left, radical left or the radical right, it's more likely to espouse Eurosceptic views. Then we know that radical right parties and populist radical right parties tend to use Europe as an ideological crowbar in order to differentiate themselves from the main street parties. But overall, Mude in 2007 has been arguing that this party family tends to stick to Eurosceptic standards rather than Euro-reject, in the sense that their opposition to Europe is more diffuse and rather than extremely radical. So what are our expectations, in the sense that we suppose that the Euro-rejection could now come across as an ideological common denominator for the populist radical right across the continent. And that the European sovereign debt crisis could have provided an incentive for this party family to both radicalize their position from Euroscepticism to Euro-rejection, but also emphasize these issues, so move it as a primary issue in their agenda. We don't really have any sort of expectations on the motives behind this radicalization, in the sense that we cannot really know, we don't know whether this radicalization is directly stemming from the crisis or financial factors. And so we undertook a qualitative line of inquiry to find out the motives behind this radicalization. Our theoretical framework sticks to the theoretical framework elaborated by Kopecki and Mude in 2002. And we do expect that these parties, basically, which are usually expected to cluster around the EU pessimist positions, have radicalized their position from Euroscepticism to Euro-rejection, meaning that since they do not, these parties do not generally support the EU as it is at the moment, we believe that they have moved from a general critical attitude towards the current process of integration to overall rejection and failure to support this project. We decided to focus on 4 case studies and 3 different time points 2005 and 2006, and 2010 and 2012. Why? Because we wanted to see what was the position of this party family before the crisis, just when the crisis started to break off, and then 2012 is the most recent time. And we expected that. I mean, we focused on these cases on the grounds that if radicalization and prioritization of this issue has actually took place amongst these 4 cases, there would be we would have a strong argument for a broader radicalization across the continent, despite their ideological idiosyncrasies, the contextual differences, and so on. What we do is we carry out a qualitative content analysis of party discourses, meaning that we primarily focus on party manifestos, but we also focus on populist statements of their leaders, and in the case of Jobbik, also personal interviews. So, in the case of Hungary, we have Jobbik, the movement for a better Hungary, and that is a party that has put a lot of emphasis on clericalism, irredentist issues, ethnic minorities, corruption, and a form of economic agenda which could be defined as social national economics. The party didn't fare particularly well in 2006 and didn't manage to get into parliament, but in 2010 the party entered the Hungarian parliament as the 3rd largest national party. When it comes to Europe, Jobbik has been emphasizing in 2006 exit from the European Union because the European Union was deemed as the master of a project of South Americanization, posing a threat to national sovereignty and national interests. But overall, this push towards exit was mostly a secondary theme in the party agenda, meaning that the focus of the party was more on the side effects of the communist transition and the side effects of globalization. In 2010, the EU platform became more prominent in the agenda of the party, mostly because of the party access into the European Parliament the year before. But the EU was mostly deemed as a platform for the resolution of questions of national interest and, in detail, the redefinition of geographical borders and the question of minorities abroad. In 2012, however, the party returned to a very fierce and radical anti-EU rhetoric and started to appeal again to withdrawal. But when we looked at the motives of this radicalization, we could claim that the party only partly referred to monetary issues. But overall, the salience had increased. When it comes to Slovakia, the Slovak National Party, who is currently out of parliament, has been overall focusing on the question of ethnic minorities within the border of Slovakia, and their rhetoric has been against the Hungarian minorities in particular, and the Roma population. And then they emphasize the traditional values. The SNS comes across as a relatively compliant case because the party has been generally has presented a form of Euroscepticism which is overall mild, in the sense that the party has showed its most pragmatic phase when dealing with the EU, in the sense that it sought to access EU funds, and in 2010 he also claimed responsibility for accessing the euro currency. So overall, the Euroscepticism was just a secondary issue in the agenda of the party. But in 2012, the party radicalized its stance and using the bailout of the Eurozone countries as a pretext for his anti-EU agenda, undertook a fairly straightforward Euro-Reject stand and started appealing to withdrawal from the EU and from the common currency. And yeah, the salience has increased accordingly.
All right, over to me and to Western Europe. So the third case that we selected was the Dutch Freedom Party, or PVV, in the Netherlands. So a party which is quite different from the Central and Eastern European cases of the populist radical right, since the populist radical right in Western Europe focuses on different issues. And the PVV is well known for its anti-Islam rhetoric, also its opposition against immigration, tough stance on law and order, patriotism or nationalism, and welfare chauvinism. So these are sort of the issues that characterize the party since its foundation in the mid-2000s. It's done very well, you can say, in national elections. So it started out with almost 6%, but then it grew very large, became the third largest party in Dutch parliament in 2010. It lost somewhat in the most recent elections, but it's still actually the third largest party, together with the left radical socialist party. Well, what about the issue of Europe in the discourse of the Freedom Party? Basically, the Freedom Party has been Eurosceptic, very Eurosceptic from the outset. It was one of the driving forces behind the No campaign for the constitutional treaty referendum in 2005. And it has always claimed that sovereignty should be restored, so power should be, should be gotten back from Brussels, so to say, and European cooperation should mainly have an economic character. But there have never been calls for exit from the Freedom Party, so in that sense it was clearly a Euro-skeptic rather than a Euro-reject parties. And it also has been a secondary theme, so Islam, especially around the 2010 elections, Islam and immigration were the main themes for Geert Wilders. Geert Wilders, the leader of the Freedom Party. In 2010, you saw a lot of continuity, actually. Europe was here and there sort of depicted as a multicultural superstate. So clearly you see back the Eurosceptic discourse. And there was also some criticism on the established parties' support of bailout for Greece. But again, it wasn't quite the primary campaign theme for Wilders, nor did Wilders support an exit from the European Union. And this changed in 2012. So now Wilders went all the way and said that the Netherlands should leave the European Union. And moreover, crisis-related themes moved really high up on his rhetorical agenda, if you like. So it was clear that now Wilders focused primarily on the issue as a campaign theme. And the manifesto of the Freedom Party in 2012 was even called Their Brussels, Our Netherlands. And the manifesto started with the issue of European integration and criticized the Greeks and also East European countries for their corruption, and claimed that, well, it was basically a waste of money to spend Dutch taxpayers' money to Greek people who then spend it on drinking ouzo. He literally used sort of this sort of rhetoric. And he also resisted the Brussels dictates and sort of the slavish character in which the Dutch political elite abided by these dictates from Brussels. So it was clear that by 2012, European integration was very much a primary issue for the Freedom Party. And he also radicalized his rhetoric, so it became a Euro-reject party rather than a Euro-skeptic party. Last country is the United Kingdom, where we selected both UKIP and BNP as populist radical right parties. You may argue that the BNP is a rather extreme case of populist radical right. Some people would rather classify it as a neo-fascist party, but on the basis of its moderation of its rhetoric in after 1999 when Nick Griffin took over the leadership. If you take this rhetoric at face value, you may well classify it as populist radical right. So that's the basis for the inclusion. You see some similar themes as the Freedom Party in their discourse, so anti-EU, law and order, patriotism, anti-immigration, with the note that especially the BNP has from the outset been much more harsh on themes related to culture and immigration, because it truly started out as a neo-fascist party, whereas UKIP focused from the outset more on the theme of European integration, and immigration only sort of entered the rhetoric of UKIP a little bit later after several leadership changes. We are nevertheless interested, so you can say that UKIP, we could expect that this was a party which was very Euro-reject from the outset perhaps, but what we are interested in our paper is whether the crisis has led to a change in sort of the arguments to oppose Europe, and whether you also see this within parties that were very critical of the EU from the outset. So other thing to mention is that these parties basically failed to have much of an impact on the national level. Let's see what happens in the European elections. I think they will be pretty successful, like many other populist radical right parties, but partly due to the single-member plurality electoral system, they had trouble in breaking through on the national level, even though they grew over the years. So with regards to this Europe-related discourse, in 2005, you can see that both parties are actually already pro-withdrawal and treat the issue as an important issue if you take their manifestos at face value, and also in their more general rhetoric. The EU is quite an important theme, especially for UKIP, because its sort of raison d'être is withdrawal from the EU. So the EU is seen as costly, undemocratic, and above all that it harms British sovereignty. 2010, so the crisis had hit already. Basically, you see a continuity in the discourse. So both parties still being very clearly Euro-reject parties, and the crisis only played a very marginal role in their rhetoric. So it was actually absent from their manifestos. They didn't refer to the theme altogether, or to crisis-related themes altogether. In 2012, again, continuity. So actually, there were general elections in 2005 and 2010. In 2012, there weren't elections. But if you look at sort of their discourse, if you look, for instance, at party leader speeches or website articles, you again see that the crisis only plays a rather marginal role. That's not to say that both parties placed occasional remarks about it. So, and these remarks, you can say they sound a bit like, I hate to say I told you so. So Nigel Farage, the UKIP leader, for instance, said, well, we always told you that European integration was a very bad idea, and the crisis just shows this. So it's good that we actually stayed out. Or at least the UK didn't stay out, but it was sort of a motive for this Euro-reject discourse. And also both parties claimed that the crisis was sort of used as an excuse by the European Commission to demand more power, so to say, to solve the crisis. But again, these remarks remained very occasional, so overall you can see more continuity than change, and crisis-related themes, or the crisis didn't really change the contents and the arguments of the Euro-reject discourse of both British populist radical right parties. So, moving to a sort of comparative slide. So this table shows both the position of the five populist radical right parties. So ES is Eurosceptic, ER is Euro-reject, and also whether they treated the issue as a primary or a secondary issue. So this relates to the salience. And what you basically can see from this is the parties that always treated the issue as a primary theme, and then you can specifically look at the UK case. They did not change this on the basis or after the crisis, whereas the parties that didn't treat the theme as a primary issue, this is a secondary issue, changed this in the very recent years. So they moved the issue up their agenda, so to say. And what you also see is that this is that this goes together with a radicalization of the discourse. So those parties that were Eurosceptic in 2010 are now Euro-reject. So we can actually speak of a convergence of the populist radical right towards Euro-rejection, irrespective of contextual differences, East or West. So the geographical location in the new or the old Europe, so to say, or other issues or other factors. So the process towards Euro-rejection transcends regional divisions and other contextual idiosyncrasies. He always puts difficult words in papers, and I don't know how to pronounce it. Yeah, but one sort of fault line, if you want to distinguish some sort of fault line, you can say that there's a difference between the parties which are based in countries that are members of the Eurozone and those countries that are not. So you see that in Slovakia and the Netherlands, the PRR clearly focuses on these crisis-related themes. So they sort of, what do you want to say? Yeah, they really related their anti-EU rhetoric to the bailouts of other Eurozone countries and the unwillingness to support irresponsible EU member states. And this you didn't really see back in the countries that did not belong to the Eurozone, because, well, this issue did not play a role because people did not have to contribute to the bailouts. So you see perhaps some fault line between Eurozone members and non-Eurozone members if you look at the contents and the arguments of the anti-EU rhetoric. So the final slide, concluding. So what we try to do in our paper is to assess whether the European crisis acted as a catalyst for Euro-rejection as a common denominator of the PRR across Europe. And this is basically what we found. So we saw a concomitant radicalization of the discourse on Europe, so a push towards exit, so to say, and a prioritization of the issue, irrespective of contextual differences. So what this basically means is that the PRR in recent years actually tried to win elections on the basis of the issue of European integration, and they treat it more than just an ideological crowbar to distinguish themselves from the established parties. And what further research should point out is, first of all, whether this trend can indeed be seen in across all European countries, but also whether this actually has, this radicalization has actually electoral consequences. So are people actually voting on the basis of the issue of European integration? Do they respond to the change in the discourse of the populist radical right? So do voters actually care about the issue of European integration? And if this is not the case, then we may ask whether this move towards prioritization and radicalization with regard to the European Union is a durable strategy for the populist radical right, or whether they sort of drop it if they notice that it doesn't really have effect on their electoral performance. If European Union turns out to be a more electorally salient theme than before, this may have a serious impact on party competition in general, or I mean, the move from the shifting strategy from the populist radical right, this may impact party competition because established parties may feel pressured to actually change their discourse as well and to become more anti-European themselves. And this in turn may also influence the future of European integration in general. So this is pretty important stuff. That's basically the bottom line. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.